I've both been a healthy skeptic of the industry and the potential, but also quite curious, and I haven't made it any great secret that I'd want to be one of those 530. I want to be number 537 if there's room. It does seem to me that on a congressional salary, it's highly unlikely that I could afford the deposit. But it raises a question, Ms. Christensen, about the profile of the individuals who want to lead those deposits and fill out this industry, because they're clearly high net worth individuals because they have the financial capacity for that. But it seems to me that, we're so accustomed to getting on boats and planes and our automobiles, and there's a comfort level attached to that. And this is somewhat different and experimental. And so what happens with those individuals that you think will fill out the industry if the flight itself doesn't kind of meet that comfort zone for people who are not necessarily scientists and researchers, but they just want to experiment a little bit?
We identified that question of how consumers, how spaceflight participants will actually respond to the experience as one of the major uncertainties that we're looking at. I can tell you that based on the survey that we did, and we focused on high net worth individuals, most of those individuals viewed spaceflight as either extremely or somewhat inherently risky. And many of the individuals that were interested in taking suborbital flights held that view as well. So to the extent that that speaks to that question, that population does appear to have a sense that that's part of the, and we also in our survey articulated to them elements of the experience such as what it might be like, both the positive and the, you might feel ill. And so that was part of the process of informing survey respondents in getting their answers.
And Mr. Whitesides, if you could help me understand, in any of these sort of risky behaviors, there's a potential that there's a mishap that's going to happen. I mean, that happens with cars. And I wonder if your company or others have established any plan as to how you'll conduct investigations or determine root causes should there be a mishap. And what do you think the relative role of the Federal Government should be in the event of such an occurrence? And I think, for example, of an agency like the National Transportation Safety Board, is that something in terms of the Federal Government that we have to stand up to have some capacity for investigation that it doesn't now have with respect to space flight? And I know that there is there clearly is an expression of concern about a regulatory environment that might constrain development, but what is the right level of regulation that the Federal Government has to engage itself in order to oversee what is, in essence, a consumer-driven market?
To start with the first question, Congresswoman, I think it's a great question, and the answer, I think, is that in terms of mishaps, it depends on the type of mishap. So for very serious mishaps, the NTSB, I believe, will work with AST, and NTSB has assigned an investigator who is becoming proficient in essentially our sector. He's come out to Mojave. He's met with many of our companies, and I think I speak only for myself, but I view him as really a very highly skilled individual who seems to understand the issues. So that engagement has begun. I think AST also has its own set of plans, and for a serious mishap, I think, would obviously defer to the NTSB's leadership of that investigation. For other mishaps, which frankly occur, lesser mishaps, you learn things continually through the flight test program. Some of those, I think the flight test team can handle themselves. They'll just learn something. It's a minor issue. And that's the point of flight test, is to improve the vehicles to the point that we're comfortable flying customers. Part of the reason that we have certainly taken, many years to prepare these vehicles is because we've been in flight test for years, and we will not fly people on these vehicles until we feel comfortable that it is the time to do so. I think in terms of your last question, I think the government, and in particular the Science Committee, who essentially crafted the 2004 amendment to the CSLAA, developed the right posture for this moment of time. And I think we obviously support that at this time.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask a final question of Dr. McCandliss, and it actually has to do with the scientific environment. It's tough for me to imagine how you balance having a sort of sterile, more laboratory environment with also commercial passengers that satisfies the needs that scientists have to do research. Is that a concern of yours?
Yes. For our own purposes, we require to be outside the cabin. So being inside the cabin would not be where I'd want to be. I mean, we conduct research essentially in situ. So it's incompatible, really, with the human spaceflight aspect.
Nobody paid to go on the Wright brothers flights. I don't recall that as part of the history books. And I wonder, Dr. McCandliss, I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier, which is this question of whether you really do need for real science. And I'm not talking about, not that the high school scientists for an education purpose aren't, really great, but I'm talking about our PhD scientists at Johns Hopkins and our other research institutions, the kind of environment that you need in order to perform the science that you could then have peer-reviewed. The environment that's been described on the vehicles that we're talking about, do you think that that is at a projected to be at a capacity where you would be able to do that kind of experimentation, developing instrumentation that's really sensitive in an environment that also contain human payloads or human people?
Yeah,
right?
it will depend upon the type of science that you're talking about. Now, for things like physiological research to see whether or not people will be able to keep their lunch down.
I'm talking about high, sort of really high technology instrumentation.
Right. Now, for our own purposes, for say NASA science programs where we have strategic plans that we're trying to advance and discover secrets of the universe, for lack of a better term, we require a good, strong base of researchers who are savvy and can carry out a lot of the tasks that are associated with building instruments, which, as everybody down the line here knows, is a very painful process to get everything to work all at once. There's a lot of Frankenstein moments, where you finally have it breathe life into the instrument and it lives, and everyone's very happy, but there's a lot of sweat and pain that goes up to that.
I only call our attention to it because I do think it raises a question about how we're going to be able to marry the passengers that want to fly and who've left deposits with what we need to do scientifically.
Ms.
And
Edwards,
before you get there, I just wonder also if you could clarify for the record that even though you work with an NTSB partner who's on your site, NTSB does not currently have any legislative statutory authority in commercial spaceflight. Isn't that correct?
To be honest, I'm not an expert on this subject, but my impression is that if there was a mishap, I believe it has been represented to us that the NTSB would work with AST on that investigation.
I feel certain that the NTSB doesn't have any current legislative authority.
The FAA, AST, and the NTSB have an MOU jointly signed by the two parties. Whether they have statutory authority or not, I can't speak to.
yeah, and just a couple of weeks ago, they actually did sort of an accident practice out in Mojave with NTSB, local first responders, and participants from the industry, as well as the airport and fire and rescue. So I know that they're actively engaged in the subject matter of which you speak.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, maybe there's some point at which we could actually bring the NTSB in and FAA and ask some of these questions. I mean, our witnesses, they're terrific, but they aren't in a position to answer those questions. Thank you.